If you looked at all the horror movies there are about cults, and if you used Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft to classify them in terms of subgenres of horror, most of them would fall into two categories. There's folk horror, which includes The Wicker Man, Children of the Corn, The Ritual, and Midsummer. And then there's cosmic horror, such as The Void, Beyond the Black Rainbow, The Empty Man, and the Netflix series Archive 81. These categories are not entirely distinct, of course, and there are some movies that ride the line, such as Lords of Salem, The Omen, and Rosemary's Baby, and the adventure that we're going to put together is going to ride the line between these two subgenres of horror as well. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to explore the Ravenloft domain of dread called Niranjan. This domain, as well as Kalakari, was designed by Ajit George, an entrepreneur, scholar, and writer, who, I might add, was nice enough to answer a couple of my questions about the domain. As usual with my Ravenloft videos, we're going to discuss what the domain is, basically, cover a few different cultural inspirations that might help you get an imaginative grip on the adventure that we're going to sketch out, and then sketch out an adventure. In this case, our adventure will take PCs from levels 4 to 9, and it will be based largely on The Price of Beauty from Candlekeep Mysteries. Now, as the description in Van Richten's Guide points out, the main themes associated with Niranjan are asceticism, brainwashing, and shadows. We could describe the whole domain as follows. A destination for aspiring spiritualists seeking enlightenment, the domain of Niranjan is named after its master, a spiritual leader who promises release from pain as well as enlightenment through a series of meditative techniques. In truth, this Niranjan is actually Sarthak, a bronze shadow dragon whose techniques consume the souls of followers, leaving them in obedient husk with a Monster Manual-style shadow as a replacement for their soul. Like all Dark Lords, Sarthak is tortured in his domain. Only for the briefest moments in devouring a soul can he recall true joy, and his followers have no real minds or personhood of their own, leaving him alone. And lonely. This is a fascinating domain, and it is immersed in themes about the loss of self, the abuse of authority, mind control, brainwashing, and cultism. Let's talk about a few modern media inspirations that you might use to get an imaginative grip on what this domain is like. Now, you may notice some of these cultural influences I cite are tales about students or children, and that's because this adventure is going to take place in an ashram. That's what the domain is, an ashram, a kind of place where you go and study at the proverbial feet of a sadhu or guru or someone who can teach you spiritual truths. In these kinds of settings, there's a huge power differential. And that difference in power is often mimicked in stories about children and their teachers. Or in one case, Wesley Crusher and Captain Picard. The first bit of media I want to mention is from 1993, and it's the Nickelodeon series Are You Afraid of the Dark? There's a particular story called The Tale of the Hatchling. It features two children who go to a boarding school, and they learn to their horror that that boarding school is actually part of an alien operation to cultivate some kind of monstrous presence that's going to take over the Earth. In general, the students at this boarding school are made to eat a mysterious food called sponge. This food leaves them brainwashed and addled so that at night they unknowingly do work in a kind of cultish, brainwashed obedience to the faculty of the school who are secretly aliens. It's a short bit of kids' media, but it's a fascinating tale, and it's not badly told. In fact, it's well told. As is the 1991 episode The Game from Star Trek The Next Generation. This episode is mostly told from the point of view of the young ensign Wesley Crusher as he horrifyingly witnesses all of the crew of the Enterprise become brainwashed. Rather than being brainwashed by a cult outright, they get addicted to a kind of game. Still, it is ultimately a horror story, and it is one that's kind of about cults and brainwashing. In addition, there's a children's book from 1989 by Bruce Coville called My Teacher is an Alien. And this is a somewhat spooky story about two children who figure out, much to their horror, that their teacher is, well, an alien, and they need to do something about his sinister plot to take over the Earth. It's a story featuring a power differential between the two protagonists and the villain, and there's a necessity for the protagonist to sneak around and try to subvert the villain's plans without getting caught, noticed, or even being discovered to know what they know. This will be very similar to the sort of atmosphere we're going to want to cultivate in our adventure. Another source, which is obviously worth mentioning, is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, either the 1956 or the 1978 version. In each case, you have people who are being replaced by duplicates, and these duplicates have some weird ulterior motive and are divorced from their former selves. This fate is very similar to what happens to people who travel to Niranjan and study under Sarthak. Their souls are taken away, they are replaced with shadows, and they become a husk of their former selves. I also highly recommend the horror film Beyond the Black Rainbow, which is about cults. But most importantly, it has this surreal, psychedelic horror scene when one of the characters does drugs. There's a part of our adventure in which the PCs meditate and travel to the astral plane and encounter horrifying things, and you may want to look at that scene and appropriate some of its psychedelic imagery in a weird way for that particular part of our adventure. And finally, I'd like to mention one source which Ajit George mentioned as a source of inspiration for Niranjan. It is the Ajivika school of Indian philosophy, which emphasized predestination, the lack of a free will, as well as personal asceticism and communal living. We can imagine the particular sort of ashram and the particular sort of philosophy that Niranjan is based on incorporates these elements into a kind of nihilism, where you have no free will and there is really nothing that you can do but give up everything and dedicate yourself to the Niranjan. Or at least that's an idea. Having discussed those cultural influences, let's sketch out the actual adventure. As I mentioned, this adventure is mostly based on the adventure The Price of Beauty from Candlekeep Mysteries, and we're going to stretch it out by adding a couple of scenes and elements. It's going to take PCs from levels 4 through 9, and at the very end, the PCs are going to fight Sarthak himself, who we will stat out as a young bronze shadow dragon. That is CR8, and when the PCs fight him, they will be CR8. They'll end the adventure by leveling up to level 9. Now, as for the Price of Beauty, what we're going to do is reskin the Temple of the Restful Lily so that it's the ashram of Niranjan. Here's how we're going to do the reskin. First, we're going to replace one of the hags with Niranjan himself, or rather, we could let any one of the 3 hags be Niranjan at any time, depending on which one the PCs are interacting with. The other 2 hags can be monkish servants of Niranjan. Remember, Niranjan and Sarthak are the same creature. I'm going to use those names interchangeably as I summarize and present this adventure. We're also going to describe everyone at the ashram as wearing uniform robes of a single color. Maybe everyone is wearing saffron or vermilion or cedalan or black. But there's going to be a kind of uniformity to their appearance. Nobody's going to have any personal possessions of any kind or any personal affects or jewelry or anything like that. Just simple robes all the same. We're also going to add a few phrases which are going to be repeated over and over by the devotees of Niranjan. These phrases include, "We are mere shadows," "Give in to the shadow," and "Niranjan is all." To better fit this adventure, furthermore, we're going to change the domain lore ever so slightly and say that Sarthak steals traits from people and turns those traits into jade statues or terracotta statues instead of paintings, and that he siphons power from these before he consumes the person's soul entirely. Once the victim's soul is consumed, they become this obedient drone of a servant, and we're going to say that the victims in Area T-17 are all soulless. And finally, we're going to say that Ilmar the Drow Harper is still looking for Sylvari, but we're going to change Sylvari into a Deva, and we're going to say that she's trapped in Area T-12, guarded by a Necrocore. And those are the big brush elements of our reskin. We're also going to do some fine-tuning as we go through this adventure. In Act 1, the PCs arrive at the ashram of Niranjan, and they immediately partake in a meditative exercise which transports them to the astral plane. There they will have frightful visions and fight off spiritual foes, which ultimately leaves them exhausted. They then level up to 5. In Act 2, the PCs will encounter Ilmar, who shares their suspicion that something is wrong with the ashram. Together, they spy on a forbidden chapel at night, and they learn the truth about their host Niranjan, that he is secretly a shadow dragon. To avoid getting caught, the PCs and Ilmar have to fight off a couple guards, and then they level up to 6. In Act 3, the PCs and Ilmar split up. The PCs cause a distraction during the meditative ritual of the day, while Ilmar tries to spy and find out what was going on in the Forbidden Chapel. Once they meet up later, the PCs discover to their horror that Ilmar has been transformed into a shadowy devotee himself, and they must fight him and then rush to the chapel themselves. Then they level up to 7. In Act 4, the PCs rush down to the bottom of the Forbidden Chapel to discover that there is a Deva being held prisoner by a Necrocore. They defeat the Necrocore and let the Deva go free, but the Deva is almost dead. It bestows the last of its power on the PCs as a gesture of thanks, and they level up to 8. Finally, in Act 5, there is a showdown between the PCs, Sarthak, and his minions. Assuming they are victorious, they have a chance to escape the domain of Niranjan, and that would be the conclusion of our adventure. So let's get into it in detail. In Act 1, as I mentioned, the PCs arrive at the ashram of Niranjan. Saith, the disguised Cambion at the entrance, is happy to take their equipment, and will insist that in time they should want to give up their weapons and armor, as well as their spell components, but he will not insist on taking them from the PCs, at least not at this time. The PCs will then be invited into Area T4, where it turns out that the great Niranjan is leading a meditative exercise. When the PCs arrive, they find a group of people all sitting cross-legged on the ground, humming a particularly eerie and bizarre tune together. Think of the song that everyone chants in Archive 81. That's a good example of what I'm thinking of. That. Assuming the PCs participate, they sit down and suddenly find themselves floating in the astral plane without their physical self. Here it would be good to indulge in some psychedelic imagery. Describe what the PCs see as they look at each other. Their eyes glow, they appear to grow new orifices, their faces seem to melt, and other surreal sort of imagery. Once they've experienced the astral plane for a short amount of time, they are attacked by a group of specters. As they attack, the specters will be saying things like, "He steals your soul, he makes you nothing, he drains you and fills you with shadow," and they strike out at the PCs. Assuming the PCs are victorious in their battle against these specters, they come to and find themselves lying prone on the meditative floor in Area T4. Niranjan will conclude the meditative exercise congratulating everyone, and the PCs will gain a level of exhaustion. Now, while the rest of the assembled guests will exclaim that this was an amazing rejuvenative experience, we have just communicated to the PCs mechanically that it was bad. Something bad is going on here. It's getting late in the day, and we've just given the PCs a level of exhaustion, something they can only get rid of with a high-level spell that they don't have access to, or a long rest. So, when they take a long rest, have them level up to 5. In Act 2, the PCs wake up their first morning in Niranjan, and just let them explore and move about. Eventually, they'll reach Area T7, where they encounter Ilmar, the Drow Harper. Ilmar will say that he's looking for a Deva named Silvari, and that he has reason to believe that the Deva is somewhere here at Niranjan. Furthermore, he says, something is not right here. He's going to ask the PCs if they've noticed that this place seems rather strange. Assuming the PCs agree, Ilmar will offer to work together with them to discover what's going on. And he will propose a plan. He explains that he's been here for a few days, and he's noticed that every night, something strange seems to be going on in the chapel, the forbidden chapel which guests are discouraged from approaching. He says, let's wait until night, and then approach that chapel, see if we can spy in and find out what's going on at this crazy place. Assuming the PCs agree, that's what they do later that evening. They steal upon the forbidden shrine in Area T11, and they peer in. What they see is horrifying. Niranjan is there, and he undergoes a bloody transformation into his true self, a bronze shadow dragon. Before him, servile underlings bow low and start chanting Sarthak, Sarthak Niranjan. The PCs witness as with an arcane ritual, Sarthak draws blood and life force alike from his followers. Now, as the ritual is just about to conclude, the PCs are interrupted. Saith, the disguised Cambion, and Morty, the Hellhound, have both spotted the PCs along with Ilmar and are going to attack them. It's up to the PCs to silence their two attackers before they can raise the alarm. Then they can retreat back to their rooms in Area T9. Now, if the PCs fail to stop Saith from raising an alarm, if Saith starts yelling his head off, and it would be implausible to suppose that no one inside the shrine heard him, give the PCs plenty of leeway in running away, disguising who they are, hiding, and generally getting away with this crime. This adventure, of course, is flexible, and what I'm sketching out here is just a groundwork, but ideally the PCs wouldn't be confronted by Sarthak in dragon form right now, not yet. Once the PCs get back to their room in Area T9, then they level up to 6. The next morning, in Act 3, Ilmar proposes a plan. He says there's going to be another meditative ritual, and that the PCs should attend and cause a major distraction. Some kind of distraction that's going to cause all of the guards and all of the servants of Niranjan to assemble, and Ilmar can use that as an opportunity to sneak into the Forbidden Shrine and see what's really in there. Ilmar will bring up a number of compelling reasons as to why it should be him who goes alone. First of all, they want to minimize the chances that anyone notices someone is absent, so it's best if only one person goes. Secondly, the PCs are already accustomed to working together as a team, so they should stick together. Thirdly, the more people that stick with the PCs, the better their chances are of causing a distraction. For all of these reasons, and any other ones you want to throw in there, Ilmar is really going to press the case that he goes and he explores the shrine, while the PCs cause the distraction in the meditation ritual. As for what the distraction is, that's up to the PCs. This is going to be a really fun time where the PCs can cause a horrible or a huge distraction in what's supposed to be a very solemn, very serious situation. They get to use their powers to be disruptive, and oftentimes players find this really enjoyable. Whatever happens as a result of their disruption, do not let Sarthak transform into a dragon or use a bunch of magic openly or anything like that. Instead, let him summon more and more minions who look like ordinary people but maybe have the stats of shadows, as well as the gargoyle minions that are already at the ashram. Once a suitable amount of chaos has gone on, Niranjan will insist that everyone calms down, and he will try to cede whatever demands the PCs give. Niranjan will ask everyone to calm down, he will ask what the PCs want, he will insist that there is no need for violence, and he will engage in dialogue with the PCs. At this point, the PCs might accuse Sarthak of secretly being a creature, or of the place as doing something funny, or of brainwashing people, and this is a time for Sarthak to practice deception. This is a wonderful situation where the PCs know the truth, they know that they're being deceived, but they're not really in a position to do much about it. Once the PCs and Sarthak reach some kind of agreement, they leave the meditative area in T4 and meet up with Ilmar. Once they meet up with Ilmar, the PCs should notice that something is different about him. He seems a little more taciturn, a little less enthusiastic, a little more matter-of-fact in his speech. His eyes are a little glazed over. The PCs will doubtlessly ask what he found out, at which point he will say to them, "You realize this is hopeless. Give in to the shadow. Niranjan is all. We are nothing but shadow." And his eyes will turn black. And he will adopt the statistics of a priest of Osibus and fight the PCs as one of Sarthak's brainwashed slaves. When the PCs defeat him, he will return to his former self for just a second before he dies. He will tell them urgently that he found something in the basement of the Forbidden Shrine, something below the first level, a power source of some kind. And not just a power source, but a prisoner, the Deva Silvari that he was looking for. He warns the PCs that they don't have much time and that they must hurry down there, now. And at that point, the PCs level up to 7. In Act 4, as dusk falls, the PCs hurry into the Forbidden Shrine and go downstairs into Area T12, where they find that a Deva, Silvari, sits chained and prone in the middle of a powerful magic circle. The circle looks like a lotus flower with an Om symbol in the center. And writhing, wriggling around it, guarding it assiduously, is a Necrocore. Now the Necrocore is hostile, but it's not unwilling to talk to the PCs, at least for a little bit. In fact, it might be willing to talk with the PCs for as long as an hour, which they can use as a short rest. At the end of an hour, or whenever it seems like it's inevitable, however, the Necrocore will attack the PCs, and a battle will pitch. Once the PCs defeat the Necrocore, the spell of containment that was holding the Deva breaks, and Silvari thanks them. She reveals, however, that her life force has been mostly drained by the dragon Sarthak. She has barely any life in her left. She is about to die. And, as a token of thanks to the PCs, she offers them the last of her power. She dies, they gain the effects of a long rest, and the PCs level up to 8. Finally, Act 5 is nothing short of a showdown between the PCs and the young bronze shadow dragon that is Sarthak. We are of course going to give him some shadows as minions, but because shadows are rather brutal to face in their ability to drain strength, we might want to throw in some wraiths or specters as well, and just describe them as being shadowy. Don't forget, of course, to use layer actions, and it's helpful to look at a few of the different layers in Fizban's Treasury of Dragon. Both the Bronze Dragon and the Black Dragon have some layers that are worth looking at, and of course, assuming that the PCs are victorious in this battle, they have a window of time before Sarthak is reborn as the Eternal Dark Lord. During this time, the borders of the domain are down, the mists have parted, and the PCs are free to escape. They level up to 9 and go on to their next adventure. So, that's our adventure in Niranjan. What do you think about it? Are there any elements that you would add in order to further emphasize the themes of brainwashing and the loss of self? Are there any other dungeons or short one-shots that you would want to put into this adventure? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, as always. I apologize for getting this video out a little late. To make up for it, I've got another video coming very soon in which I discuss what I think the future of Dungeons & Dragons is going to be like when they unveil the new version in 2024, so-called 5.5. So I'll put that out very soon. In the meantime, please do all the internet things, click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications on the weekly updates I do provide, and thanks very much.